Welcome to Module 101, Lesson 1, Heart Rate and Heart Rate Training Defined. Before we get into anything today, let's first define heart rate. So heart rate is the number of contractions of your heart within 1 minute. There's a linear relationship between heart rate and exercise intensity. As your exercise intensity increases, so does your heart rate. There are many terms that we want to define today, so let's go through the first one now, resting heart rate. This is your heart rate when you are at complete rest, either sleeping or just when you've woken up in the morning. You can test your resting heart rate by doing a resting heart rate assessment right when you've woken up in the morning. Usually resting heart rate is about 60 to 100 beats per minute, but in very fit individuals, it can be even lower than that. MyZone will estimate your resting heart rate if you perform the assessment that I just mentioned.
I'm going to define ambient heart rate, which is different than resting heart rate. Ambient heart rate is a restful state throughout the day when you've been wakeful. And you might have already had breakfast or a cup of coffee. You can assess ambient heart rate throughout your exercise program. And if you do that, make sure that you maintain as many variables constant as possible. So if you're assessing ambient heart rate, replicate what you ate, when you ate it, if you had caffeine, and take your ambient heart rate at the same time on a post-assessment. I'm also going to talk about submaximal exercise heart rate. And submaximal exercise heart rate is any exercise heart rate that is lower than maximal heart rate. This value is obviously going to vary based on your exercise intensity, and when we define the MyZone zones, we'll be defining the various submaximal zones. As you become more fit, something that you might notice is that your submaximal heart rate at any given workload might decrease. So you might need to challenge yourself by adding an increased workload in order to challenge your heart rate up into higher submaximal zones like yellow and red.
The next term that we'll define is maximal heart rate. This is the maximum number of contractions of your heart in 1 minute for a given exercise. And I say given exercise, that's important because it can differ a little bit between, say, running on a treadmill versus cycling on a cycle ergometer. When you're running on a treadmill, you're using more muscle mass, and so you might find that you have a higher maximal heart rate. Maximal heart rate is defined by MyZone, or estimated by MyZone, as maximal heart rate equals 206.3 minus 0.711 times your age. So it's taking age into consideration. As we age, we tend to see that our max heart rate will decrease. Whereas with exercise and becoming more and more fit, we don't really see there's too much of a difference in your maximal heart rate. The last term that we're going to define for you is recovery heart rate. And this is how quickly your heart rate can recover after a bout of exercise, how soon it can decrease down toward resting levels. As you become more fit in your training program, your recovery heart rate should speed up a bit. You should get better at recovering faster because your heart is more efficient at recovering.
Now that we've defined some of those very important terms around heart rate training, let's talk about what heart rate training is. It's when you use heart rate to monitor or prescribe intensity. That's why the MyZone system is so handy. We're using heart rate as a variable in the programming of our training, and we're monitoring it over time. We most commonly use cardiorespiratory exercise when we're measuring heart rate training. However, you can use it with resistance training, especially if you're doing continuous or circuit-based resistance training.
So let's talk about MyZone now, right? MyZone has a wonderful feedback system that allows you to see in real time what your heart rate is doing, either on your smartphone through the MyZone app or on the MyZone group display in your fitness facility. MyZone uses color-coded tiles that indicate your nickname, your estimated caloric expenditure, your relative intensity, which is also your percentage of maximal heart rate, your actual heart rate, and then also your MyZone effort points. You'll also note with the upgraded software that there's a line that goes across your tile above your percentage of maximal heart rate, and this gives you a little snapshot of your workout so far in color. Thank you so much for joining us for Module 101, Lesson 1.